there is a specific kind of financial loss that never shows up as theft on any record. No one broke into your account. No one held a weapon to your throat. You gave the money willingly. You transferred it, handed it over, or simply stopped protecting it because the situation felt urgent, because the person felt close, because refusing felt like a moral failure on your part. And what makes this particular kind of loss so difficult to process is not the money itself. It is the realization, sometimes months later, sometimes years later, that you were not being generous. You were being operated. Most men who get financially drained by the people around them never use that word, operated, because it implies that someone was thinking clearly while you were not. It implies that while you were responding to emotion, they were following a method. And the human brain resists that conclusion when the person in question is someone you shared meals with, someone who called you family, someone whose name is still saved in your phone under something warm. But here is the truth that Machiavelli understood 500 years ago with a clarity that most modern psychology still hasn't fully matched. He wrote that the prince who cannot distinguish between those who serve him and those who feed on him will eventually have nothing left to rule, not because he was robbed at knife point, because he was made to feel, slowly and repeatedly, that protecting himself was morally equivalent to betraying someone he loved. That is the mechanism. Not dramatic, not violent. Quiet, patient, and almost invisible until the damage is already done. And once you learn to see it, you will see it everywhere. In relationships you are currently inside, in situations you thought were behind you, and in dynamics you have been calling something else entirely. Francesco Sforza rose to become Duke of Milan in the mid-15th century, not primarily through warfare, though he was one of the most feared military commanders in all of Italy. He rose because he understood something that nearly every ruler before him had gotten catastrophically wrong. He understood that the men who destroyed Italian princes from within were not assassins, not rival armies, not foreign powers. They were the inner circle. The people who had spent years positioning themselves close enough to a ruler that their survival began to feel like his personal responsibility. Sforza kept meticulous records, both mental and written, according to historians of the Milanese court, of who came to him only when they needed something, how they framed those requests, what emotional levers they pulled in the conversation, how the invisible ledger of obligation was being constructed around him, brick by brick, without his ever formally agreeing to it. He called this practice knowing the temperature of a room before you enter it. You do not wait until you are already seated at the table to understand who benefits from your presence there. You study the pattern before the conversation starts. You look at the history before you respond to the immediate situation. What Sforza identified is exactly what you are about to learn to identify. Not the dramatic betrayal that arrives all at once and announces itself clearly. The quiet, structurally elegant, emotionally sophisticated process by which someone turns your goodwill into their financial infrastructure. One interaction at a time, one small yes at a time, until the yes becomes the default and the no becomes the thing that requires explanation. These are the 9 signs. Sign 1, the emergency architect. Every time money moves between you and this person, it moves inside a crisis. It is never a calm conversation on a Tuesday afternoon where they say, "I have been thinking about this for a few weeks and I would like to sit down and discuss it with you." It is always sudden, always urgent, always wrapped in a situation that appears to have materialized from nowhere, requiring an immediate decision, ideally before you have had time to consult anyone or think clearly. Machiavelli noted that a man who controls the timing of a decision controls the decision itself. Urgency is not an emotion. It is a tactical condition that is manufactured and deployed deliberately because urgency does something very specific to the human brain. It bypasses the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for calculating risk, weighing consequences, and identifying inconsistencies, and activates the limbic system, the part that responds to social threat and loyalty pressure. When a decision feels urgent, you stop asking whether the request makes sense. You start asking whether you are a good enough person to respond to it. Think about the last time this person came to you about money. Was there ever a version of the conversation that arrived early enough for you to genuinely think it through? Or did the clock always seem to start with 30 seconds already left on it? The emergency architect does not have unusually bad luck. They have an unusually refined, often unconscious understanding of how to frame a request so that your hesitation reads as abandonment rather than reasonable caution. They construct the crisis first. Then they come to you. And the crisis is always timed to land when your defenses are lowest, late at night, during a stressful period in your own life, right after a moment of closeness when your guard is naturally down. The person who genuinely respects you will give you time to think. Not because they are patient by temperament, but because a legitimate request does not depend on bypassing your judgment in order to succeed. Sign 2, the reciprocity trap. At some point in the history of your relationship with this person, they did something for you. It may have been genuinely significant. It may have been relatively minor. But they did it, and at the time, it created a real sense of warmth and mutual support between you. You felt the bond. You felt the closeness. That original moment was authentic. What you may not have registered is that the moment never ended. It is still being invoiced. Not explicitly. There is no spreadsheet. There is no direct statement of, "I did this for you, therefore you now owe me." It operates far below that level of directness. It lives in phrases like, "After everything I have done," or "You know I was there for you when no one else was," or "I just assumed we were the kind of people who looked out for each other." These are not expressions of genuine hurt. They are retrieval mechanisms. They reach back into your emotional memory, locate the warmth of that original moment, and position it directly beside your current hesitation so that refusing feels not like a financial decision, but like an erasure of everything you built together. Robert Greene, building on Machiavelli's framework, identified this as one of the oldest and most durable social manipulation structures in recorded human interaction. He called it the gift that never stops collecting. The favor that presented itself as generosity, but was actually a long-term investment with an expected return that was never disclosed at the time of the transaction. Here is the precise test for this pattern. Ask yourself whether this person references what they have done for you more frequently when money is involved than at any other point in your relationship. If their past generosity surfaces most reliably in the context of a financial request, then the original act of kindness was not free. It was a deposit into an account they fully intended to withdraw from on their own schedule, under terms you never agreed to. Sign 3, witness removal. Pay close attention to where these conversations happen. Pay attention to who is in the room when a financial topic comes up. And pay even closer attention to the conversations that seem to find you only when you are alone. If every significant money-related conversation with this person happens privately, never in front of your partner, your closest friend, a sibling, anyone who knows you well enough to offer even a raised eyebrow, that is not coincidence or preference for privacy. That is architecture. People who are systematically extracting money from you cannot survive an audience. Not because everyone around you would necessarily intervene, but because your own thinking changes when another person is present. You become more deliberate, more aware of how a request sounds when it lands in a room with other ears. More capable of noticing the pressure for what it is, rather than for what it is framed as. Machiavelli was explicit on this point in his advice to princes. The ruler who can only be reached in isolation is the ruler who is most vulnerable to manipulation, because isolation does not just change the physical conditions of a conversation. It changes the cognitive ones. When you are alone with someone who has spent years building a precise map of your emotional vulnerabilities, you are operating at a structural disadvantage before a single word has been spoken. Notice the pattern in your own history with this person. Has there ever been a financial conversation that happened openly, in front of others, with time and space for you to respond without pressure? Or have those conversations always seemed to find you at the end of a private call, in a car, in a corner after everyone else has left? If the answer is consistently the latter, ask yourself what it is about a third set of eyes that this person's requests cannot survive. Sign 4, the guilt anchor. This is the most psychologically sophisticated of the 9 signs, and it causes the most lasting damage not to your bank account, but to your self-concept, because it does not target your money directly. It targets the story you tell yourself about who you are. When you decline a request or simply hesitate, this person does not argue the practical logic of what they are asking for. They do not bring new information or clarify a misunderstanding. Instead, they make a statement, or imply one, which is often more powerful, about your character. Statements like, "I never thought you would be this kind of person," or "I guess I was wrong about you," or simply a withdrawal, a coldness, a silence that communicates disappointment without ever making a claim you can directly respond to. These are not expressions of authentic hurt. They are precision instruments. They work by linking your financial refusal to a negative character trait so that agreeing to the request becomes the only way to restore the image of yourself that you actually want to inhabit. You are no longer saying yes to a money transfer. You are saying yes to being the loyal one, the generous one, the person who does not abandon people when it matters. Carl Jung described the psychological mechanism at work here as identity capture, the process by which someone else's narrative about who you are gets installed inside your own sense of self and begins generating decisions you did not consciously choose. Once that narrative is in place, you are no longer protecting yourself from a manipulative request. You are performing a character in a story that someone else wrote and cast you in without your knowledge. The clearest separator between manipulation and genuine relationship exists right here. The person who genuinely cares about you will receive a no without redefining you. They may be disappointed. They may express that disappointment, but they do not use your refusal as evidence of a character flaw because they understand that you are a separate person with your own reasoning, not a function that is supposed to return a specific output on demand. Sign 5. The velocity push. Every request arrives with a closing time, not a suggested timeline for your convenience. A hard deadline that happens to land before you have had enough hours to consult anyone whose opinion you trust, verify any of the details being presented to you, or simply sleep on the decision and see how it looks in the morning. This is not impatience, it is engineering. Behavioral research on decision-making is consistent and overwhelming on this point. When cognitive pressure is high and available time is short, human beings default almost automatically to emotional reasoning over analytical reasoning. They respond to social risk, the fear of being perceived as disloyal, cold, or unhelpful, rather than to actual financial risk. The velocity push is a deliberate technique for relocating your decision-making from one part of your brain to another, and the person applying it either knows this consciously or has learned through repeated experience that it works. Machiavelli framed it simply: the man who decides under force, whether that force is physical or emotional, makes the decision his captor needs, not the decision his own judgment would produce in conditions of freedom. A request that collapses without your immediate answer is a request that cannot survive your considered one. The practical response to this sign is deceptively simple. When you feel that artificial urgency beginning to close around you, you say one thing: I need until tomorrow. Not a refusal, not a confrontation, not an explanation of why you need more time. Just 24 hours. And then you watch what happens. If the response to a single day's delay is escalating pressure, visible withdrawal, or sudden anger, you now have more information about this request than you would have gathered from any amount of analysis. Sign 6. The softening sequence. Before the ask, there is a period of unusual warmth. And if you trace the timeline carefully, you will find that this period of warmth does not occur randomly. It occurs on a schedule that correlates with uncomfortable reliability to what comes next. The week or two before a significant financial request, this person was more present than usual. They checked in more. They were generous with their time and attention. They said the things that made you feel seen and valued. And then the request came, and some quiet part of you felt that declining after all of that would be a form of ingratitude, as if warmth had created an obligation that you were now failing to honor. Sun Tzu wrote about this as a military principle. Before you advance, you make the opposing position feel secure. The strategic deployment of warmth and attentiveness before a financial request is the social equivalent of softening a defensive line before moving through it. It is not accidental kindness that happens to precede a difficult conversation. It is a preparation phase. This does not mean that every kind act from this person is calculated in the moment. Many people who run this pattern are not consciously aware of the sequence they are following. But awareness does not determine effect. Whether the softening is deliberate or habitual, it functions identically. It lowers your defenses at precisely the moment they most need to be intact. The distinction between genuine affection and strategic warmth is this: genuine affection is consistent across time, independent of what is coming next. Strategic warmth has a rhythm, and the rhythm, if you plot it, points in a specific direction. Sign 7, the moving goalpost. You agreed to the smaller thing. You said yes to one amount, and then it became a larger one. You agreed to a single instance of help, and then a second situation materialized, and then a third, and somewhere in that progression the original agreement became completely unrecognizable, while somehow still feeling like a natural continuation of what you had already consented to. This operates through a cognitive principle that social psychologists call commitment consistency. Once you have said yes to something, once you have publicly, even privately, committed to a position, your brain experiences subsequent related requests as extensions of that original commitment rather than as new decisions requiring fresh evaluation. Changing course feels not like a reasonable reassessment, but like an admission that your earlier yes was a mistake. And most people, particularly men who value their word, would rather continue being quietly exploited than openly acknowledge they were wrong to agree in the first place. Your original small yes was not actually a response to a small request. It was an anchor, a point of entry that was designed from the beginning to expand. Machiavelli observed this pattern in the gradual erosion of power from weak rulers by their own advisors. No one took the throne in a single move. They took a concession, then another. They built precedent. And by the time the ruler understood what had happened, enough had already transferred that reclaiming it required more conflict than most men were willing to initiate. Ask yourself whether this person's requests have stayed roughly the same size over time, or whether there has been a slow but consistent expansion, each new ask framed as barely different from the last one you already agreed to. You hesitate, and immediately they tell you what someone else did. A mutual friend who helped without question, a family member who understood the situation. Someone, somewhere, who is being positioned as the benchmark of loyalty against which your current hesitation looks insufficient, ungenerous, or cold. The comparison is never made bluntly. It does not need to be. The implication is enough. Other people, people who genuinely cared, did not make this complicated. This technique is effective because human beings are social calibrators by nature. We do not evaluate our own behavior in isolation. We evaluate it against what we believe others would do in the same situation. If the people around you apparently said yes without difficulty, then your no begins to feel like a deviation that requires justification, and deviation at the level of social identity produces a discomfort that is deeper than logic. It lives closer to shame. What you need to understand about the social proof being presented to you is that it is almost always unverifiable, frequently distorted, and sometimes entirely fabricated. You cannot call the mutual friend and confirm what they agreed to and under what conditions. You cannot ask the family member what the full context of their yes actually was. And the person using this technique is fully aware of that. They are not presenting evidence. They are constructing a social mirror that makes your own reflection look like something you should be embarrassed by. A legitimate request does not require you to feel inferior to unnamed third parties in order to proceed. If the only way a request can gain traction is by making you feel like the worst version of yourself, by comparison to people you cannot actually speak to, the request does not have enough weight to stand on its own. Sign 9. The disappearing accountability. The money is gone. The situation it was meant to resolve either did not resolve or dissolved in a way that is difficult to trace back to anyone's specific choices. And when you raise it, carefully, with every effort to be diplomatic and fair, something happens that you did not expect. The conversation moves, not through confrontation, through drift. Suddenly, the subject is how difficult things have been lately, how much pressure this person has been under, how the circumstances were beyond anyone's control. And somehow, through a series of subtle shifts that you cannot quite pin down as they are happening, you arrive at a point where you are the one who feels like the unreasonable party. You are the one who has done something slightly wrong by raising the subject at all. You leave the conversation not with resolution, but with a vague, uncomfortable guilt that you cannot fully explain. This is the final and most revealing sign, because it exposes the entire load-bearing structure of the operation. Every sustained financial extraction depends on a single non-negotiable condition, that accountability never fully lands. Because the moment it lands, the moment you connect cause and effect cleanly, without allowing the conversation to drift, the system collapses. The person can no longer present themselves as the victim of circumstances. They become, plainly and without narrative cover, someone who received something from you and chose not to return it. So accountability must be continuously dissolved. Your memory of what was agreed must be made to feel like pettiness. Your reasonable expectation of a result must be reframed as an emotional attack. Your clarity must be made to look like coldness. And the person running this pattern has usually had years of practice at performing this dissolution so smoothly that you walk away from the conversation believing you caused the very problem you showed up to address. Machiavelli wrote that the man who cannot name a loss clearly is a man who will repeat it indefinitely. Naming it is not an act of aggression. It is the foundational act of self-governance that everyone who has ever benefited from your generosity is quietly hoping you will never perform. Here is what most men do once they recognize these patterns. They either go silent and begin withdrawing from the relationship without explanation, letting distance do the work they are unwilling to do in conversation, or they confront the person directly with the full weight of everything they have now understood, and the conversation turns into something neither of them can recover from, and they spend the next several years feeling guilty about the wreckage. Both responses are understandable, neither is correct. Because what you now understand, after sitting with these 9 signs and running them honestly against the architecture of your actual relationships, is that you are not dealing with a character flaw you can argue someone out of. You are dealing with a system. And systems are not dismantled through confrontation. They are dismantled through the withdrawal of the resource they were built to consume. That resource is not only your money, it is your predictability, your guilt, your need to be seen as someone who does not abandon people. Your discomfort with being perceived as the cold one, the selfish one, the one who let a relationship end rather than simply saying yes one more time. Those are the levers. And you now know exactly where each of them is located. The man who finishes watching this and simply becomes suspicious of everyone around him has missed the point entirely. Suspicion is its own kind of cage. What you are developing here is not paranoia. It is pattern literacy, the ability to read the structural logic of a social interaction without losing your capacity for genuine connection. Because genuine connection does exist. It is real, and it looks nothing like what you have spent the last 27 minutes studying. Most men will never hold both of those things at once. They will remain open and keep getting drained, or they will close entirely and mistake the silence for safety. The man who can do neither, who stays warm, who stays present, who simply cannot be moved through guilt or social pressure or carefully manufactured urgency, that man is genuinely unreachable, not because he stopped caring, because he finally understood the difference between the people who want to be near him and the people who want to be near what he has. That distinction is the only one that actually matters.